Lecture 4.2 English Renaissance. The plan of the lecture. First, Sir Thomas More, a typical representative of English humanism, Utopia. Second, University wits. Christopher Marlowe, a reformer of dramatic verse. Third, the sonnet forms by Sir Thomas Wyatt and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey. Fourth, Arcadia, a pastoral romance in prose. Translation problems. Fifth, the poet's poet, Edmund Spenser and his allegorical poem The Faerie Queene. Key characteristics of the Renaissance. Religious devotion of the Middle Ages gave way to interest in the human being placed on this earth. Universities introduced a new curriculum, the humanities, including history, geography, poetry, and languages. Invention of printing made books more available. More writers began using the vernacular. Characteristics of the Renaissance. Humanism. Man is a wonderful creature whose potential is limitless. Secularism. Importance of worldly knowledge and experiences. Art. Artwork emphasized human themes, realistic look, classical myth. Literature. Writers concerned with human concerns, love, anger, friendship, wrote in vernacular. The Renaissance man does lots of things well. The English Renaissance, dated by years 1500–1660. It is difficult today to define the Renaissance. Etymologically, the term, which was first used in England only as late as the 19th century, means rebirth. Broadly speaking, the Renaissance implies that reawakening of learning which came to Europe in the 14th and 15th century. Sir Thomas More, a typical representative of English humanism. Utopia. In a tradition of literature remarkable for its exacting and brilliant achievements, the Elizabethan and early Stuart periods have been said to represent the most brilliant country of all. These years produced a gallery of authors of genius, some of whom have never been surpassed, and conferred on scores of lesser talents the inviolable ability to write with fluency, imagination, and verve. From one point of view, this sudden renaissance looks radiant, confident, heroic, and belated, but all the more dazzling for its belatedness. Yet from another point of view, this was a time of unusually traumatic strain, in which English society underwent massive disruptions that transformed it on every front and decisively affected the life of every individual. In the brief, intense moment in which England assimilated the European Renaissance, the circumstances that made the assimilation possible were already disintegrating and calling into question the newly won certainties, as well as all the truth that they were dislodging. This doubleness of new possibilities and new doubts simultaneously apprehended gives the literature its unrevealed intensity. Thomas More, also called St. Thomas More, was a humanist and statesman, Chancellor of England, who was beheaded for refusing to accept King Henry VIII as a head of the Church of England. He is recognized as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. In Sir Thomas More, English humanism bore fruit in major literary achievement. Educated at Oxford, More was also influenced by Erasmus, who wrote The Praise of Folly at More's house and named the book punningly after his English friend. More's famous Utopia, a kind of companion piece to The Praise of Folly, is similarly satirical of traditional institutions, but offers, as an imaginary alternative, a model society based on reason and nature. Book second. Reminiscent of Erasmus and Valar, More's Utopians eschew the reader's cultivation of virtue and enjoy moderate pleasures, believing that nature herself prescribes a life of joy, that is pleasure, and seeing no contradiction between earthly enjoyment and religious piety. Significantly indebted both to classical thought and European humanism, the Utopia is also humanistic in its implied thesis that politics begins and ends with humanity, that politics is based exclusively on human nature and aimed exclusively at human happiness. Utopia is a Greek name of Morse coining from utopos, no place, epanon utopos, good place, is suggested in a prefatory poem. More's utopia describes a pagan and communist city-state in which the institutions and policies are entirely governed by reason. The order and dignity of such a state provided a notable contrast with the unreasonable polity of Christian Europe, divided by self-interest and greed for power and riches, which More described in Book First, written in England in 1516. The description of utopia is put in the mouth of a mysterious traveller, Raphael Hippolyte, in support of his argument that communism is only cure against egoism in private and public life. Through dialogue, More speaks in favor of the mitigation of evil rather than its cure, human nature being fallible. Among the topics discussed by More in Utopia were penology, state-controlled education, religious pluralism, divorce, euthanasia, and women's rights. The resulting demonstration of his learning, invention, and wit established his reputation as one of the foremost humanists. Soon translated into most European languages, utopia became the ancestor of a new literary genre, the utopian romance. English humanism flourished in two stages. The first, a basically academic movement that had its roots in the 15th century and culminated in the work of Sir Thomas More, Sir Thomas Eliot, and Roger Ascham, and the second, the poetic revolution led by Sir Philip Sidney and William Shakespeare. University wits. Christopher Marlowe, a reformer of dramatic verse. The term university wits was not used in their lifetime, but was coined by George Sansbury, a 19th-century journalist and author. Sansbury argues that the rising sap of dramatic creativity in the 1580s showed itself in two separate branches of the national tree. The university wits included Christopher Marlowe, Robert Greene, Thomas Nash, all graduates of Cambridge, and Thomas Lodge and George Beale, both of Oxford. Another of the wits, though not university trained, was Thomas Kidd. Preceded by John Lilly, an Oxford man, they prepared the way for William Shakespeare. The greatest poetic dramatist among them was Marlowe, whose handling of blank verse gave the theatre its characteristic voice for the next 50 years. Christopher Marlowe alone realized the tragic potential inherent in the popular style, with its bombast and extravagance. His heroes, a man of towering ambition who speak blank verse of unprecedented and occasionally monotonous elevation, their high astounding terms embodying the challenge that they pose to the orthodox norms and the limitation of the societies they disrupt. In Tamburlaine the Great, two parts published in 1590, and Edward II, published in 1594, traditional political orders are overwhelmed by conquerors and politicians who ignore the boasted legitimacy of weak kings. The Jew of Malta, published in 1633, studies the man of business whose financial acumen and trickery gave him unrestrained power. The tragical history of Dr. Faustus, published in 1604, shows the overthrow of a man whose learning and atheism threaten even God. The main focus of all this plays is on the uselessness of society's moral and religious sanctions against pragmatic or moral will. They patently address themselves to the anxieties of an age being transformed by new forces in politics, commerce, and science. Indeed, the sinister, ironic prologue to the Jew of Malta is spoken by Machiavelli. In his own time, Marlowe was damned as an atheist, homosexual, and libertine, and his plays remain disturbing because his verse makes theatrical presence into the expression of power, enlisting the spectator's sympathies on the side of his gigantic villain heroes. His plays thus present the spectator with dilemmas that can be neither resolved nor ignored, and they articulate exactly the divided consciousness of their time. There is a similar effect in the Spanish tragedy by Marlowe's friend Thomas Kidd, an early revenge tragedy, in which the hero seeks justice for the loss of his son, but in an unjust world can achieve it only by taking the law into his own hands. Kidd's use of cynic conventions, notably a ghost impatient for revenge in Christian setting, expresses a genuine conflict of values, making the hero's success at once triumphant and horrifying. The sonnet forms by Sir Thomas Wade and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey. Henry Howard was an English nobleman, politician, and poet. He was one of the founders of English Renaissance poetry and the last known execution by King Henry VIII. Henry Howard is a poet who, with Sir Thomas White, introduced into England the styles and methods of the Italian humanist poets and so laid the foundation of a great age of English poetry. In his sonnets, White modified the Petrarchan model, changing the rhyming of the tercets. His sonnet scheme is as follows: Abba Abba CDD CEE. Most of Surrey's poetry was probably written during his confinement at Windsor. It was nearly all first published in 1557, 10 years after his death. He acknowledged Wilde as a master and followed him in adapting Italian forms to English verse. He translated a number of Petrarch's sonnets already translated by Wilde. Surrey achieved the greatest smoothness and firmness, qualities that were to be important in the evolution of the English sonnet. Surrey was the first to develop the sonnet form used by William Shakespeare. His sonnet form consists of 3 quatrains and a couplet: A B A B C D C D E F E F G G. Arcadia, a pastoral romance in prose. Translation problems. Philip Sidney, Elizabethan courtier, statesman, soldier, poet, and patron of scholars and poets, was considered the ideal gentleman of his day. After 6 Shakespeare sonnets, Sidney's Astrophel and Stella is considered the finest Elizabethan sonnet cycle. His The Defense of Poesy introduced this critical idea of Renaissance theories to England. In 1578 he composed a pastoral playlet, The Lady of May, for the Queen. By 1580 he had completed a version of his heroic prose romance, The Arcadia. It is typical of his gentlemanly air of assumed nonchalance that he should call it a trifle, and that triflingly handled, whereas it is in fact an intricately plotted narrative of 180,000 words. The contents of Pembroke's Arcadia, also known simply as Arcadia, is a long prose pastoral romance by Sir Philip Sidney, written towards the end of the 16th century. Having finished one version of his texts, Sidney later significantly expanded and revised his work. In 1584, he began a radical revision of his Arcadia, transforming its linear dramatic plot into a many-stranded, interlaced narrative. He left it half-finished, but it remains the most important work of prose fiction in English of the 16th century. He also composed other poems and later began a paraphrase of the Psalms. He wrote for his own amusement and for that of his close friends. True to the gentlemanly code of avoiding commercialism, he did not allow his writings to be published in his lifetime. The incomplete revised version of his Arcadia was not printed until 1590s. In 1593, another edition completed the story by adding the last 3 books of his original version, and the complete text of the original version remained in manuscript until 1926. His Astrophel and Stella was printed in 1591 in a corrupt text, his Defense of Poesy in 1595, and a collected edition of his works in 1598, reprinted in 1599, and 9 times during the 17th century. The poet's poet Edmund Spenser and his allegorical poem The Faerie Queene. In its present form, The Faerie Queene by Edmund Spenser consists of 6 books and a fragment, known as the Mutability Cantos. According to Spenser's introductory letter in the first edition, 1590, of his great poem, it was to contain 12 books, each telling the adventure of one of Gloriana's knights. Like other poems, Spenser must have modified his general plan many times. Yet this letter, inconsistent though it is with various plot details in the books that are extant, is probably a faithful mirror of his thinking at one stage. The stories actually published were those of Holiness, The Red Cross Knight, Temperance, Sir Gawain, Chastity, Britomart, a female knight, Friendship, ostensibly concerning Triamond and Cambello, also display a small part, Justice, Artegall and Courtesy, Calidore. As a setting, Spenser invented the land of Faerie and its queen Gloriana. To express himself, he invented a 9-line stanza, the first 8 of 5 stresses and the last of 6, whose rhyme pattern is A B A B B C B C C. What is most characteristic of Spenser in The Faerie Queene is his serious view of the capacity of the romance form to act as a paradigm of human experience, the moral life as guest, pilgrimage, aspiration, as eternal war with an enemy, still to be known. As encounter, crisis, the moment of illumination, in short, as ethics, with the added dimensions of mystery, terror, love, and victory, and with all the generous virtues exalted. Modern readers' impatience with obscure allusions in the poem, with its political and ecclesiastical topicalities, is a failure to share the great conflict of Spencer's time between Protestant England and Roman Catholic Spain. To Spencer, the war between good and evil was here and now. In The Faerie Queene, Spenser proves himself a master. Picture, music, matter, story, all elements are at one with the deeper significance of his poem, providing a moral heraldry of colors, emblems, legends, folklore, and mythical allusion, all prompting deep, instinctive responses. During the Renaissance, English literature gained greater psychological complexity. The Middle Ages was largely dominated by plays, more interested in imparting morals or presenting religious stories than anything else. Around the 15th and 16th centuries, humanism, a system more interested in human affairs than what might occur after death, was on the rise. The effects of the Renaissance on English literature were an increased emphasis on humanism and individuality, as well as an increased willingness of writers to satirize existing institutions, such as the church and state, and to write secular rather than religious works. The end. Thank you.